clicking on this video. My name is Carolyn and this channel is all about true crime, mystery, and anything abnormal. I highly recommend subscribing because this channel is definitely a vibe. I have an extremely interesting story for you today. It is very similar to the Idaho 4 case that's currently going on. Now, we know, obviously, at this point, Bryan Kohberger is still assumed innocent. He's not been proven guilty by a court of law. But if we think about Bryan Kohberger, we know that he studied criminology and was getting a PhD in it. So that leads me to believe he has studied a lot of crime. And it's puzzling how similar these two crimes are. What I'd love for you to think about through the video is, could the Idaho 4 case have been a copycat crime? So let's jump right into today's story. Leslie Ann Mazzaro was born in 1978. She was a former beauty queen who had competed in the Miss South Carolina pageant. At the time of the crime, she worked at a winery in Napa Valley, California, and she dreamed about having a career in the wine industry. She was invited to share a home with two young women who would be her roommates, Lauren Meanza and Adriane Insogna. She was an extremely talented athlete, and she coached the volleyball team at the local community college. They all lived together in the beautiful Napa Valley. Little did they know that soon a crime so horrific would be committed that it would end some of their lives and change the survivors' lives forever. Adriane was born December 30th, 1977. Her parents were Arlene Allen and Tony Insogna. In 1996, she had graduated from high school. She then pursued her studies in civil engineering and got her bachelor's degree. She had attended California Polytech State University in St. Louis Obispo, and she had graduated in 2001. After graduating, she got a really good job working as a civil engineer in the sanitation department. Lauren and Adriane had been really good friends for quite a while, so they decided in 2004 that they were going to rent a house together, as well as getting another roommate. And they were so excited that they would be moving in together. They loved the place they were moving into, so they decided to have an impromptu celebration. Adriane invited her best friend Lily and Lily's boyfriend Eric Copple to the party that they were having at their house. Eventually, in that summer, Leslie then moved in and was the third roommate living in this house together. 3 days before Halloween, on October 28th, 2004, Leslie had brought a guy home. So she brought him home. They went to her bedroom, had some fun adult exchanges. And this was the first time anyone had brought a man into the house to come and stay overnight. The three roommates sat down and had a discussion of exactly how it would work when one of the three of them wanted to have someone come over and spend the night. And they all had kind of agreed that this is something that would happen occasionally in the house. They didn't think much of it, and just like that, it was Halloween. On the night of Halloween, the girls had stayed home and they were handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters and looking at their costumes, and they had a really nice kind of laid-back night, and all of them had gone to bed by about 11 p.m. because they had to work in the morning. So in the household, there are 2 bedrooms on a higher level. Up in that area is Leslie and Adriane's bedrooms. In the basement, there is then another bedroom, which was Lauren's bedroom. Around 1:30 or 2 a.m., Lauren, who is the roommate who was living in the bedroom in the basement, she looked out the window and she saw that the light from the garage had come on. So it was like a motion activated light, and she just assumed that it had been cats in the area had walked by and the light had come on. Her dog started to bark a little bit and she settled him down to get back to sleep. What she didn't know is something absolutely horrific was about to happen. She was awoken a short time later and she could hear somebody walking up the stairs. When she heard the footsteps, they had just discussed Leslie's boyfriend coming over and spending the night. So that's what she assumed. She assumed that Leslie had contacted her boyfriend to have him come over. So she wasn't alarmed by the footsteps. She just assumed it was Leslie's boyfriend. And then she drifted back to sleep. Lauren was then awakened again, but this time she would see, hear, and experience things that would never let her peacefully sleep again. She heard some loud, unsettling noises come from one of the bedrooms upstairs. She was laying in bed still with her eyes closed, trying to figure out what the noises were that she was hearing. She suddenly opened her eyes when she heard a blood-curdling scream. She knew somebody was in the house and that things were not okay. She heard Adriane scream, "Oh my God, somebody help me." So she jumped out of bed. She opened her door and walked out into the hallway to try to listen at the staircase to figure out what was going on. All of a sudden, she could hear someone coming running down the stairs towards Lauren. Her instincts were telling her to escape out the back of the house, but she questioned of whether she was helping the killer chase her out of the house. If she was to go out the back door, the entire backyard was surrounded by a 6-foot tall fence. So if she was able to get out of the house and get into the backyard, she would essentially be trapped in the backyard. Full of fear, Lauren found herself standing in the backyard without any way to protect herself. She stood there waiting for the intruder to get out of the house the same way the intruder had gotten into the house. The intruder had gotten into the house through the kitchen windows. The intruder struggled with the blinds for a few minutes before finally getting out of the house, and then it became eerily quiet, which was then followed by Adriane's pleas for help. Lauren had never even got a glimpse of the intruder, and she wasn't 100% sure that he had gotten out of the house. She didn't know, was he hiding somewhere in the house and waiting for her to come out so that she could be attacked? She was very confused about what to do and where to go to be safe. She thought maybe she was being ambushed, but all she could think about was she needed to help Adriane. There was a home phone in the kitchen, and she picked up the phone to try to call 911, but the phone line was dead. She decided to go upstairs and try to help Adriane herself. She tiptoed up the stairs, completely unaware of the horror that she was going to see when she found Adriane. In Adriane's bedroom, Lauren saw what looked to be straight out of a horror movie. The entire floor of Adriane's bedroom was covered in blood. Leslie was face down in a pile of clothes with stab wounds all over her body. And Adriane was barely holding on to life. She was crouched behind her bed and she was bleeding from so many stab wounds. She immediately knew when she had seen the scene that this was not something that she could help with. She needed to call 911. She took her cell phone and she ran out of the house to call 911. The first 911 call failed, but then she got on the phone with 911 and she's obviously explaining to them what is happening. While she's on the phone with 911, she realizes she has no idea where the intruder is. If the intruder left the house, did he leave the area? Could he be watching her? So what she decides to do is she gets in her car, and I think this was a genius idea on her part. She gets into her car. She's still on the phone with 911, getting ambulance and police to try to save her 2 roommates. But she's in her car and she's just driving kind of up and down the street so that at least if the intruder is somewhere outside of the house, she could just drive away to get away from him. The police arrived promptly, but unfortunately, by the time that the ambulance and the police had arrived, both girls had passed away. The news of the tragic incident that happened on Dorset Street traveled through the area very quickly. It left everyone in shock, in horror, and desperately missing the two girls who had lost their lives. The community, which was an extremely safe community, had not had a murder happen in their county in 2 years. Adriane's mother was in Australia at the time that she was contacted by the Napa police to inform her that her daughter had been murdered. Leslie's mother was in Michigan, and she was home alone when she was contacted by the police to find out that her daughter as well had been murdered. And very similarly to the Idaho 4 case, the first question that everyone has is, why would the killer have left a surviving roommate? Was it intentional, or was it just random luck? Everyone was left questioning, who was the mysterious intruder, and why would they have wanted to take Adriane and Leslie's lives? Despite keeping most of the case details under wraps, there was wild speculation going on within the community. It definitely wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was a planned crime of passion that had extreme overkill, usually suggesting that they know the victims. But as we look at the Idaho 4 case, overkill is not only done to people that know each other. Sometimes there's just deranged killers. Arlene, Adriane's mom, couldn't help but come up with her own suspicions. She believed that possibly Leslie could have been the main target, and Adriane had gone and tried to help Leslie, and then she ended up being killed trying to protect her. And Arlene had come up with this suggestion based on what she had observed. Leslie was new to the area, and she was going out and she was having a lot of fun, meeting a lot of new people. And with that came a lot of male attention. And she was dating several men. So Arlene's thinking was somehow Leslie must have been the intended target. The detectives, while investigating, had several questions. Could this have been Leslie's on and off again boyfriend? Could have been an admirer of Leslie, or someone she had just randomly met? Amy Brown, who was a childhood friend of Leslie, had met all of the men that Leslie had dated, and she thought about, obviously she's thinking about everyone she has met that's had contact with Leslie, and none of them seemed suspicious, and none of them seemed, in her mind, could be capable of doing such a heinous act. According to detectives, they believed that the intruder had entered Leslie's bedroom first. Other than that, they weren't sure of the sequence of events. The detectives believed that Leslie had passed away very quickly, and that she possibly could have been stabbed in her sleep and passed away and not even have woken up. Detectives believe that possibly Adriane could have woken up or heard something when Leslie was being attacked and would have gone in to try to help her, and then she was attacked. The other possibility is other detectives believed that the intruder had come into Adriane's room and that Adriane had put up a huge struggle and she fought really, really hard for her life. The detectives believed it had been an extremely brutal fight between Adriane and the killer. And what this would mean is that the killer would most likely have injuries and possibly have quite serious injuries. The police did have a significant lead in the case, because you remember when I was talking about earlier how the intruder entered and exited the house. So the intruder, the kitchen was on the main level, and the intruder had come in the kitchen window, which had been unlocked, but there was blinds over the window. So when the killer was leaving the house through the blinds, some of the blood that would have been the attackers ended up on the blinds. So the police had the DNA of the killer at this point. The crime scene search, they had over 266 pieces of evidence that were found. But there was one very significant thing that was found. The piece of evidence that they found were cigarette butts that had been smoked and that were outside of the house. The cigarettes were gold Turkish Camel cigarettes, which at the time, I don't know if they're popular now. I don't know any, I've never even heard of them before, but at the time it was a very small amount of people that smoked these cigarettes. It was really not a brand that was very common that most smokers would smoke. So the police found this extremely helpful. Also, a cigarette is going to contain DNA from the saliva of whoever smoked the cigarette. They knew that if the cigarettes were from the intruder, they couldn't have smoked the cigarettes after the crime. They would have had to have smoked them before the crime, because we know that Lauren had run out of the house afterwards and the intruder was nowhere to be found. So it could only mean that if the killer was smoking the cigarettes, possibly they were outside of the house waiting for the perfect time to enter or devising exactly what their plan was going to be. But those cigarette butts would end up solving this crime. But they still don't know if the cigarette butts were from the killer. One of the first suspects in the case was Leslie's ex-boyfriend. His name was Brian West, and Leslie's friends had told police that he had always gone to extreme lengths to show Leslie how much he loved her. Despite them only dating a couple of months, he had purchased a car for her when they were in college. And then he did the creepiest thing. Okay, so they break up. He's not happy about it. He decides to create an entire website dedicated to Leslie. And if that is not a screaming red flag, I don't know what is. Could you imagine if you were dating someone and you guys broke up and they created an entire website dedicated to you and how much you mean to them? Like, I would be creeped the F out. Like, I thought for sure, when I was researching this, I thought, oh my God, it's gotta be him. That's like psychotic behavior. But, you know, I'm wrong sometimes. The police were still going with the theory that Leslie was the intended target. So the crazy ex-boyfriend, his DNA didn't match, so it wasn't him. Another person in Leslie's life was a lawyer, William Youngblood Jr., and the two of them had lived together for a short time while they dated. Leslie at one point had even mentioned that she may want to marry him. The problem was she was extremely uncomfortable around his family. Specifically, she was extremely uncomfortable around his father. His father's name was William, and he was a lawyer as well. How Leslie started getting creeped out by this guy was he would call Leslie frequently, but he was never calling Leslie trying to get in contact with his son. He would just call Leslie to just talk to Leslie. Leslie's friends had thought that possibly the father had some type of obsession with Leslie. But the thing was, when police talked a lot to friends, it seemed like most men who dated Leslie became obsessed with her. The police became very interested in William, the father, when they found out that William had called Leslie twice on Halloween. So the girls, I don't know if I explained this yet, but the girls actually ended up being murdered on November 1st. So they have Halloween and then they go to bed, and then after midnight, they were killed around 2 a.m. So the father earlier had called Leslie twice, which police found very odd. Detectives believed they had finally cracked the case. They thought this father, he must have been the one that had done this. They traveled to South Carolina where he lived to question him, and he obviously denied it. So they took a DNA sample, and the DNA came back and it was not a match. So Again, they were stuck with having a suspect that they thought looked good, but when they run the DNA test, again, it doesn't match. The truth was going to come out soon, but nobody was going to believe who the killer turned out to be. Police felt like they were back to square one, so they decided they were going to try to get the DNA of as many men who had had any contact with Leslie as possible, and they were going to start running DNA test after DNA test because they needed to find out who had committed this crime. Some of Leslie's friends had brought up a night where Leslie had been with her boyfriend, who they were on and off again, and they had been out at a bar, and the friends had seen Leslie and her boyfriend there, and they noticed that something was very off with Leslie, and they also noticed something was very off with her boyfriend. They later found out that while they were at the bar, a man had come up and started speaking to Leslie, and this enraged the boyfriend. The boyfriend was furious. They told police it wasn't normal jealousy, it was something very eerie. So police question the man. He obviously denies it. They take his DNA test, they run it, and again, it's not him. The DNA doesn't match. Leslie's mother, Kathy, she had a theory too. She thought possibly Leslie wasn't the target. Possibly Adriane had been the target. Police as well were looking into the possibility that it could have been targeted against Adriane, not Leslie. The police began to focus on a man by the name of Christian Lee, who had been someone that Adriane had dated kind of on and off. Him and Adriane had been arguing for weeks. Adriane wanted a more serious commitment, and he wasn't really interested in a commitment. Their relationship had been anything but smooth sailing. There was constant arguing, constant fights, and it was something Adriane was upset about quite often. She would come to work in tears, and her coworkers would comfort her. Police questioned Christian. They then took some items from his room, one of which was a knife. They also took samples of his blood, as well as they took some of his clothing and his bed sheets. The police then ran the DNA, and again, it came back and he was not the killer. After Adriane had been murdered, her mother, Arlene, had started driving Adriane's car, and she hadn't changed the preset radio buttons in the car. And it was something that brought her a lot of comfort during this time because it made her feel almost as though Adriane was there with her while she would be driving in her car listening to the music stations that Adriane had chosen. But the lack of leads in the case was getting to her, and it was happening with Leslie's family too. They were getting so frustrated and not figuring out, why can the police not solve this crime? But in the meantime, there were some good things that were happening as well. Adriane's best friend Lily and her boyfriend had decided to get married after 8 years of dating. The original plan was for them to get married on November 1st, 2004, which would have taken place in Hawaii, and it was also the same day that Leslie and Adriane had been murdered. Lily couldn't help thinking if she would have gone ahead with the wedding as planned, none of this would have happened because they all would have been in Hawaii. Adriane's mother, Arlene, was invited to be part of the ceremony, and she read scriptures during their wedding ceremony. It was a day filled with joy, but Lily couldn't help but miss her best friend, and she really couldn't believe she was getting married and Adriane wasn't there with her. And Lily had stated, somebody must know something. She said, a friend of whoever did this must know something. They must have noticed injuries on the attacker. There must be someone out there who knows something about this case. And she really just wanted that person who, if they knew something, to come forward. And those words would go on to haunt Lily when she found out who the murderer really was. But days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months, and it still was not solved. The police had interviewed over 1,300 people. They had taken 200 DNA samples. And after all of this, they still had absolutely no idea who had committed this crime. They looked at those who had known the victims. They looked at the friends of the victims. They looked at the friends of the friends of the victims, but nothing. There was a killer on the loose in Napa, and no one had any idea who it was. And everyone would be shocked when the killer was caught, which would happen very soon. In September 2005, 11 months after the murder, there was a very significant development in the case. Remember the cigarette butts that they had found outside the house? The DNA had finally come back and matched. So they knew the cigarette butts and the blinds, the blood that was on the blinds with the DNA matched. They knew that these were both the killer's DNA. So detectives told Lauren, the surviving roommate, to try to think about who it could be and who she knew that was a smoker, because they knew that the killer was a smoker. So they thought possibly if she could think of who she knew that smoked, that would be able to narrow down who it possibly could be. After thinking for a little while, she came up with a name, and police realized they had never tested this person's DNA. The information had never been released to the public, that the cigarettes had been found, that there was DNA on the blinds. None of that information was made public. But once they had got the DNA sample from the person that Lauren had suggested, and they had sent that off to be tested, when the police made it public that they had the DNA on the cigarette butts and on the blood, they believed that this may cause someone to come forward. And the police were correct. Just 5 days later, an arrest was made. At that time, what no one knew was there was a young man who, when he heard the news about the cigarette butts being found, he became intensely paranoid and terrified. This revelation would turn out to be a turning point in this case. The killer was under so much pressure that he decided that he was going to unalive himself. So he sent 2 letters to his parents, basically unaliving letters. But he couldn't actually follow through with unaliving himself. So his family met with him, he confessed to them, and they convinced him to go to the Napa police and admit what he had done. The killer was 26-year-old Eric Copple, who was Lily's husband now, who was Adriane's best friend. This revelation was extremely shocking to everyone. But the thing that was the most shocking was this man had murdered Adriane, and he had then had her mother speak at his wedding to Adriane's best friend. This woman is not going to be able to speak at her own daughter's wedding because he took her life. But he had this woman speak at his wedding. And it's so deranged and crazy to me. And I think about it, well, it was, it was probably Lily who wanted Adriane's mother to speak at her wedding because she'd known her, most of her life, and it was her best friend's mother. And she probably wanted to include her in the day and stuff. But if you have murdered someone, how can you let their mother speak at your wedding and she won't speak at her own daughter's wedding? It's so sick. Eric was somewhat of an enigma. He was known to be kind of a very shy man. He was very quiet, kept to himself, and he worked as a land surveyor. A friend of Adriane's named Ben had spent quite a bit of time with Eric and Lily together, and he noticed most of the time when they were together, Lily did most of the talking, and Eric kind of was quiet, and he was more of an observer. And very similarly to the Idaho 4 case, even though Brian Koberg has not been convicted, both men had no criminal record, really. He didn't have so much as a speeding ticket, let alone commit any type of crime. It was so unexpected and so shocking to everyone who knew him. Eric was then arrested, and the DA made a comment publicly that he found it very hard to believe that Lily had been with him for 11 months and had never suspected anything. And at first, when I read that the DA had said that, I thought, oh my gosh, come on. Lots of true crimes. There's like wives of serial killers who've killed like 30 people and the wives have no clue. How, like, I was kind of angry at the DA when I had read that, because I thought that's such an irresponsible thing to say. Like, there's no evidence at all that Lily was any part of this. And I would then probably be eating these words, because wait for the next bit of information. Because Lily said she had absolutely no suspicion. And Arlene, who was Adriane's mother, just absolutely could not believe that Lily could have been aware of what happened. She had been best friends. They had been like sisters, her and Adriane. It didn't make any sense that Lily could have known any of this. Or could it? With Eric's arrest on September 29th, 2005, there was kind of a sigh of relief for the community, because at least now they had caught the person who had committed the murder. So it gave everyone kind of a sense of safety, but it didn't explain why. Why had this seemingly quiet, as far as everyone else who knew him thought he was a pretty normal guy, why on earth would he have killed his girlfriend, soon to be wife, best friend, and one of her roommates, and leave one of the roommates alive? Like, it didn't make any sense. A lot like the Idaho 4 case, doesn't make a lot of sense. The DA would go on to explain, after speaking with Eric, that Eric had wanted all of Lily's attention, and any time or energy that Lily spent with her friend, Eric was threatened by that, and he felt like that was taking away from their relationship. On that Halloween night, Eric had gotten very drunk, and Lily was upset with him about it, and she refused to spend any time with him. Eric claimed he found himself drunk, alone, on what was supposed to be their wedding night. He then told the police what happened next was unclear. He said he felt like his relationship with Lily was going to end, and he thought by killing her best friend and Leslie, whether he went in intending to kill Leslie is still unclear. Why he left one roommate surviving is unclear as well. But basically, he thought that she was a threat to their relationship. And then, you know, killers, they gotta have memory problems. So he claims he can remember getting drunk. He can remember leaving his house with a knife. He can remember standing outside the house deciding that he was going to go in and kill them. But magically, he cannot remember the actual killings. He says he remembers smoking those cigarettes, and he kind of doesn't have a memory, but he admits that he was the one who committed the crime. It's just magically escaped his memory. When he was asked about what did he do with his bloody clothes, Eric admitted that after he had gone home and burned the clothes that he was wearing and the shoes that he was wearing. So he can remember everything up to going into the house to commit the crime. Magically, the period where he commits 2 heinous murders, that just poof out of his brain, and then all of a sudden he can remember what was happening afterwards. I call BS, but whatever you need to do to justify your psychopathy, I guess, is what you're gonna say. To avoid putting the families through a trial, Eric and the district attorney came to an agreement that he would not face the death penalty, and he would serve life in prison. At the sentencing, Arlene, Adriane's mother, had a chance to address Eric. And this is what she said. "Eric, you are a man who violently stabbed to death the best friend of the woman you loved. That is not love, Eric. You cannot love Lily and bring a knife into Adriane's home and stab her again and again and again. While Arlene spoke, Eric remained extremely emotionless. And then the last person to speak would get his attention. Lily, his wife. Lily was granted special permission to speak on behalf of her husband. Yes, Lily gives a statement. Lily, Adriane's best friend, who this piece of garbage that you married, murdered, she gives a statement in support of Eric. So I'll read you what she wrote. She expressed her wish that these events could have been avoided. They could have been avoided. Your husband could have not murdered these two girls and it could have been avoided. Yeah, it was pretty easy to avoid. She said that there was nothing Eric could do to make her love him any less. Really? Like, really? And that her love for him remained as strong as ever. So I think we need to have a psych evaluation done of Lily. Because what? And this came as a huge shock to everyone that Lily was up there. Not that Lily was up to speak, but that Lily was up to speak in defense of Eric. And then it started making people wonder, back when the DA had suggested that he didn't believe it was possible that Lily could have not known what had happened, it starts to make you think, well, maybe she did know what happened. I really highly doubt that she knew beforehand that it was going to happen. I don't believe in any way that, but we know that the killer had injuries. If you are dating someone, how are you going to hide injuries? You're literally naked together. Like, how could you hide injuries? And she knew exactly what injuries to look for. So, I don't know. The judge only allowed the first minute of him speaking to be recorded. So this is the unreleased words. He mentioned that he was fearful that his relationship with Lily, which was the one positive aspect in his dark life, was on the verge of falling apart. In his twisted thinking, he believed that Adriane, her best friend, was to blame for his relationship with Lily falling apart. Spoiler alert, it was falling apart because you're a creepy, evil man. So that is today's story. I would love to know your thoughts on whether you think this is similar to the Idaho 4 case. So basically, it's just double. Like, the Idaho 4 case is just double. Instead of 4 roommates being killed, 2 were killed. Instead of 2 surviving roommates, there's 1 surviving roommate. But just knowing how much Bryan Kohberger, and yes, he's not been found guilty yet, so allegedly, to know how many crimes that he would have studied, I wonder if he studied this crime, because it's so similar. And yeah, so let me know your thoughts on that. Is that just like, am I wild and thinking like these two are just so similar? I don't know, but I'd love to know your thoughts on the story, what you think of it. And I appreciate you being here with me, and I will see you in the next one.